Hello there and welcome to another episode of Four Tims in a Podcast. I'm your host Andy and tonight we've got a slightly different episode. Is me and Tony, who you all know, are joined by Paul Quigley from the Celtic Fans Collective. So thanks a lot to Paul for coming on. Just to give a sort of brief overview of why we've got a slightly different episode tonight. We're ultimately here to discuss the meeting that went on, and I'm sure everybody listening to this knows has happened at Celtic Park between various fan organisations such as the Collective. Ultimately the meeting itself was disappointing, but aside to that, it was also a very revealing one. The club sort of showed their disregard for supporters, for members of the organisation, and people like Paul who were there can attest to that. We're going to sort of go through what happened, give a sort of vibe, and really sort of speak to what it was like in the room, what the responses were like, how the club came across, and how the club spoke to people. Just to give everybody who doesn't get the chance to be in there or doesn't get the chance to speak to Nicholson and Mackay and these people an understanding of what it's like and what they really think. I'm sure the meeting minutes that have been much discussed, supporters will gain sight of them when they're available publicly, and then obviously supporters between what's been put out in fan media across the next couple of days, what's been put out on social media, and obviously the minutes fans can sort of make up their own minds for there. But ultimately, in my view, they sort of confirm a lot of what we already know. The hierarchy of the club are detached, defensive, dismissive, whatever you want to call it. But Paul, I'll just bring you in right away. We were there. My first question is, were you surprised? That's what comes to mind. Were you surprised at how it went overall?
Hi mate, thanks for having us on. And to kind of dive right into the question, the honest answer is aye. And I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that, mate, if I'm being really honest. I've engaged with the club or kind of met with the club in different capacities quite a lot over the course of the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. And I think, like, when we seen how they behaved over the course of the summer, the refusal to properly invest in the squad and the kind of time that we would expect to make sure we were prepared for the qualifiers. And when they released that statement, the kind of anger that kind of swelled across the support, like actually united elements of the support that aren't usually in agreement on this issue. There's like a kind of conservative with a small c element of the fan base that's probably defended the board, in my view, for too long, but who were finally sort of coming round to the idea that, that change was going to be needed. And I really thought that when it was apparent that this was no longer just a kind of, some of the kind of rabble-rousing elements, that this was something that we all felt, 420 signatories of supporters buses, fan organisations, CSCs based abroad, podcasts, fan media, ultras groups, like almost the entire support represented and the kind of wide diversity of what the support looks like, all agreed on the fact that this can't continue, that change is needed. And naively, I'll be honest, I did think they've no called this meeting to just bring us in and give us kind of some of the, same old shite. I did expect some form of like humility. I'm not saying that I expected us to be able to negotiate, Nicholson and Mackay out of their own jobs and to have a, the war is over, the rebels have won kind of moment on the stairs. But I did honestly expect a bit of introspection, a bit of reflection as to what had went wrong, and even, some acknowledgement that they've really badly fucked it over the course of not just the last window, but like a pattern that we're seeing in terms of how underprepared we are for qualifiers, that it really demonstrates that the kind of overall strategy isn't working. And what we got was a slap in the face. There's no other way to describe it. And when I came out last night, I was scunnered, I was really frustrated, I was embarrassed by the fact that, we had obviously called off the kind of planned protests, and we'd done that in good faith, because we want to go in and we wanted answers to those questions set out in the statement. And I did think that we would get some progress, but I think, as much as this is, I think, my second time on this show, I'm a long time listener, and I can't remember what show it was, but I remember listening into Tony, and he was talking about how much the board hate us. That's been his line for a wee while. How much contempt did he have for us, and it was made crystal clear last night, and it tells you that for the moment, sitting down and meeting with these people and expecting them to, come to their senses isn't going to work. So we as a support are going to really need reconsider how we kind of up the pressure on them, because Celtic's too important for all of us to leave it to these people because they're incapable of doing the jobs that they're in.
Aye, and I'll just bring you in just now, Tony, because I think Paul makes a good point there. You've obviously, like always, but probably in this show, you've been the most vocal for the longest time, talking about the hatred of the board, but listening to that, you're justified really in what you say. You've probably hit the nail on the head. I mean, what's your thoughts just before we jump in, obviously, to sort of the meeting, the bones of the meeting, but what's your initial thoughts listening to that, Tony, for somebody who obviously who isn't in the room?
Well, I think that's it. I think. Obviously, I made the point that as much as some of the fans hate the board, I think the board hate us, and I think their actions, their statements, their communication tells us what they think of us. For me, it's just astounding the money that people put into Celtic in the collective is just a group of people who no doubt were working on Monday and then decided to take time, well, they could have been spending it with their wife, their wains, their kids, their husbands, whatever, and decided, no, I'm going to go and try and speak to the Celtic board and try and make things better. And it sounds as if it's just been a case of we're not doing anything wrong. Now, see if they'd have turned around and says, look, lads, and we really made such an arse of this. I could accept that a bit. See, it seems to be the hardest word for them to say is sorry. To just put the hands up and go, look, really sorry, that was unacceptable in that window. We accept we've damaged the team, we've damaged the club, we've put the manager under a lot of pressure and the fan base as well. And if they come out and said something like that, if there was some humility, some accountability, opposed to, it basically sounds like, you don't know what you're fucking talking about. We know what we're doing. That's it. And I just find that quite incredible that they don't seem to see the issues they've caused. And you see, some fans obviously stick up for them and it's, oh, it was one bad transfer window or one bad Champions League qualification campaign. That is not true. This is a pattern of continual mistakes that could be avoided. I mean, so many Champions League qualification disasters. I'm not even going to name them. I've named them. I could fucking sing them in my sleep. I know all the teams that have papped us out. And this might sound a bit spoiled. There's not one of them that should put Celtic Football Club out over two legs. Or one leg when you look at Fenerbahce. But there's just so many mistakes this board have made. And it looks as though they don't want to take accountability for it. So it's disappointing, it's disheartening as well, because you kind of look at the collective that have come together very quickly and they've put in a lot of effort, these people, and obviously they've managed to secure this meeting and in good faith they called off the silences, etc., which is great. And you don't... That's what I made the point as well. Nobody wants to be doing this. Like, nobody wants to be sitting on Monday night talking about corporate governance to Michael Nicholson and Chris Mackay. Like, nobody wants that. People want proper corporate governance, proper communication in Celtic Football Club to be run properly without having to use up their own time. You have to go and tell the board what the issues are. And even, you think the board will accept some responsibility? It sounds as if they've just had an answer for everything or a no comment for everything. So I feel for you guys that were at the meeting. It wouldn't be me, if I'm honest. I wouldn't be. I know there's people who apparently travelled over the island for it. I would not be jumping on a plane to go and talk to these people. So it's disappointing. But I think there's probably going to be even more an appetite for change, and obviously the collective will be driving that. So I can only wish them the best of luck.
Aye, and I think Tony's probably going to speak the thoughts of a lot of people who are listening to this, Paul. But as I said, we're going to try and sort of paint as best a picture as we can of what it was like in the room and the sort of conversations that were had. So I've got a few questions if I was going to put them to you, and the first one would be: did you get the sense that they actually took any of the 7 questions that were originally put in the open letter seriously, or any of the questions that were actually asked in the room seriously? I would say to that, because to my mind they kept continually rejecting. We don't accept the premise of that question. We don't accept that. We think these are asking the same thing. So did you get the sense that they just weren't taking it seriously, and it was as merely a sort of, don't know how you would put it, as if they've called the reason at the meeting rather for an ulterior motive, potentially, some would say, to get the action called off?
So, see for me, mate, I don't even think it's just that they didn't take the question seriously. I think it's that they don't take the support seriously. I think that, they see themselves as executives, so Mackay's got a history, I think, in like the whisky industry. Nicholson worked in a kind of legal firm or whatever, before he came to Celtic as the secretary. And I think that they sort of see it as any other business, and they probably think that your Marks and Spencers and your JD Sports and Waitrose and whatever other companies, that they don't need to deal with like exceptionally angry and passionate customers as they see us, and I think they genuinely don't think that they have any real responsibility to see us as the sort of primary stakeholders for the football club. I think that ahead of the meeting, I don't think that, in terms of like the answers that we got, there was no meat in the bones to anything that we heard. We tried to give them as much scope as we could for them to explain themselves, but every single question was either met with, as you say, a kind of real defensiveness or really vague, meaningless platitudes, So, for example, when we came on to, what was obviously the catalyst for this, which has been the kind of disastrous summer window, and I think that's just a manifestation of the kind of broader problems, but it's the thing that sort of lit the fire here, right, and get the support really agitated, given how disastrous the tie was against Kyrat, and in the sort of state of the squad at the moment as we, head into a kind of title race. And when we asked those specific questions around like the transfer window and trying to understand, what was the approach, but particularly, one thing that they've said is, I think the line was along the lines of, we're not happy with where we are, we hope to be in a better place. But when we were then asking, right, okay, what have you identified as the kind of reasons for that feeling? To which point Michael Nicholson objected to the categorisation of it as a failing. But then when we were saying, okay, what have you identified as where the blockages might have been, is where things haven't gone the way that you'd hoped? And they absolutely categorically refused to provide any meaningful detail or answer. Everything was framed along the lines of, we'll either deal with that internally, or in that specific instance, he made the point repeatedly that what they would do is they would, after every window, they have a kind of scheduled reflection on what had gone on how successful or unsuccessful they were, and they would measure their successes internally. And when we then asked, okay, I mean, it's over a month now since the window shut, and window didn't shut 2 days ago, but okay, even taking that at face value, that you've still not reflected on the window over a month out at this point, would the club at that point commit to coming and telling the supporters where they feel that where they've not taken the right action, what they've learned from the process, and how they'll change their strategy with having learned from this particular instance going forward. And even asking for that, even asking for a commitment that they would come back to us on what I think is like a really, really basic point, and Michael Nicholson repeatedly refused to do so. I mean, you were there, Andy, you would have heard how he danced around it, making points like, we'll commit to thinking about that, and we'll see if we'll come back to you, rather than saying, we commit to having those discussions and reporting back to the support. And it comes back to my initial point. It's not just that they are dismissive of the questions, they're dismissive of us. And I'd be, one thing that I thought was positive last night, one of the very, very, very few positives to take from it, is that I've been in the room with, Michael Nicholson and Mackay before, and I don't think that they are impressive people. I don't think that they're competent in their roles. I don't think that they have the sort of intelligence or charisma or understanding of, what the club is and what it means to the fans to actually do the job. And if there's something that I can take from last night, is it because, we had quite a lot of representatives there, and that's maybe not, it's something that you would have continued going forward. But having more people there, I think, really exposed how badly out of their depth they two are, and I'm hoping that more people will come to see that as time progresses. But it was a really stunning experience on.
Aye, and I think you make a good point there, Paul, in terms of listening to these meetings and meetings of that sort and round tables, and in any sort of business or any walk of life or whatever, you're probably not always the most productive in these circumstances, just for having that volume of people. Because naturally, and especially in these circumstances when it's such an emotive subject and people feel so passionately, a lot of people want to contribute, and conversations aren't always the most sort of productive that way. But I completely agree with you. I think having so many different people from ultimately where I've came from so many different views and so many different thoughts on it, but all seeing the level of incompetence, the level of arrogance, to be honest with you, when they're talking about their football strategy, how they're convinced it's correct. They started saying it's the execution, it's not the direction. And again, I'll just sort of bring you in here, Tony, just to, again, gauge your thoughts sort of hearing this football. I mean, for me and for my money, I think when we were talking about that and talking about the football strategy, the transfer strategy and that kind of thing, it was ultimately as if they were trying to talk down the ambitions of fans and really sort of protect mediocrity, especially when it comes to transfer deals, when it comes to Europe. We've spoken about that for a long time, Tony, so again, I'll let you come in here and just sort of give your thoughts at this point.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, on one hand, this is a board that likes to kind of take swipes at Rangers as if they're this silly wee club. But then on the other hand, their only ambition is to beat this silly wee club. It can't be both. You can't say that you're this ambitious European world-class club, but really all you want to do is beat a club that's been in turmoil for 13 years. Like, those two things can't be aligned. Like, they don't make sense. And it seems to, they just say things like, we want to be world-class. There isn't one thing about Celtic that's world-class. The fans, the collective are world class, I'll give them that, but there's nothing that said the stadium is not world class. It's miles off it. Nicholson's not world class. I'm afraid at the moment none of the players are anywhere near that. Not that you would expect that, but there is things off the pitch that could be world class. The match day experience, an app that allows you to swap tickets if you can't make the game, hospitality experience, even so many simple little things like hot water in the toilets, which would be a start. But I think it's just so disappointing. But it's no surprising for me. Like, Nicholson and Mackay are probably sitting there going, why are we talking to these people? Like, they don't care. They want us to give them our money and fuck off. They don't want this. They're not interested in it. They don't want fans on the board. They don't want a fan advisory board. They want the fans to be quiet, to give the hard end over to them, and then just shut up. That's all they want. They're not interested in meeting with fans. They're doing this just now because they're probably losing money out their arse when it comes to the Europa League and merchandise. And that's without either one of them being called for boycotting. I think some fans have took it among themselves, myself included, to cancel the home cup ticket scheme and pledge not to give them another penny over the season ticket. And I think that'll ramp up more as time goes on, because that doesn't affect the players on the pitch. That seems to be a big kind of argument, or silences and whatnot affect people on the pitch. If I don't buy a Bovril at the game, that's no affecting any Acho or Maida. So I think there's going to be stuff like that where the pressure's going to ramp up. I think there was just such an opportunity for the board to act world class and come up with something yesterday that could really have went, wow, right, maybe the collective should work with them and we can drive forward. But it seems to have been a case of no comment, we don't accept that question, we don't accept the premise of this, and basically we'll get round to that kind of thing. It's astounding stuff. And I think that's the thing, they know they've got us emotionally. Like, if I went to any other place in the world where I'm a customer and he basically says, here, you just sit down there, shut the fuck up and give your money, you'd be like, what are you talking about? And you'd walk out. But obviously Celtic's just a totally different thing altogether, so it's disappointing. I was hoping we would have maybe had a step forward, but it sounds as if we've had a massive step back, and it's on the board. And I'm trying to make this point as often as I can. See anything you think's wrong at Celtic, it goes back to the board. You think the manager's pish? Well, the board haven't sacked him. You think he's wasted money and Engo's in need of? Well, it was the board that came up with that. That's their transfer basically strategy. So anything you think that's the board, it can go back to the board. And I think they're just making such an ass of so many different parts of the club, and I've said that a million times, but I'll let you two kind of have a bit more on the meeting itself. But I would hope there's fans listening to this and reading the statements and going, this just cannot continue, cannot go on.
Aye, and when you say a lot of these things, Tony, a big theme for me is accountability. I've touched on it a wee bit here, Paul. A total lack of accountability, a lack of even the intention to take accountability at any point when it comes to transfer strategy, when it comes to the state of stadiums and the state anything's in. Now, obviously, one of the things of many fucking disasters the club have had so far this season is the leak to the media. Now, from that, obviously, I'll bring you in to touch on this, because I think this is really, really important. And it was, honestly, I nearly had to pick my jaw up off the flare when I heard them say it. But just to paint the picture for people, when asked about the Sun leak and what the club's done about it, Where's the accountability? What doing? The response was, we're busy enough as it is. Now, Paul, obviously you can give your reaction to that, the reaction of the room. I'm sure you heard fucking gasps, because I did. But just to bring you in there and talk about that, because I think that's hugely important.
Aye, people couldn't believe that. And you know what I think the biggest issue with that was as well, is it was an open goal for them. You know what I mean? Like, listen, we all, I'd imagine in this room, and most of the listeners, will have a good idea about who we think it might be, right? We all understand some of the kind of politics and some of the stuff that seems to be going on behind the scenes between some of the kind of big personalities within the club, right? But all that the club had to do, all that Michael Nicholson had to do to respond to that question would have been to have said, look, we're investigating it. We're trying to speak to, speak to board members, speak to contacts in the media, and try and find harder, firm evidence as to who might have been responsible for that. We can't act on hearsay. We can't act on, rumours that people might have heard. But if we find hard evidence that a member of the board has linked against the manager, then of course we'll take clear action against them, and we're looking into that just now, right? And even if that went fucking nowhere, right? Even if that was just empty words and they had no intention of doing it, to me it was like such an easy question for them to bat out the park, because for me as one of the kind of supportive representatives, my concern with going in with questions like that is, how are we going to actually hold them to it? How are we actually going to hold them to account? They've got an easy out. And I think the fact that they didn't even take that, that they were just absolutely adamant that no, this is actually a non-issue. This is the matter is closed, is what Nicholson said multiple times. We consider the matter closed. Again, it tells you about the contempt that they have for their fans, and it also tells you what they're comfortable, looking the other way from within the club. And that is essentially the likelihood of a really senior figure within the club, snaking the club itself, ratting out the manager, and whatever you might think of him, that isn't a way for a functional football club or a functional business of any sort to operate. And the fact that they couldn't even have a human conversation about it, they're hiding behind, this is the tabloid newspapers, you can't trust what they say. Well, if you're thinking that this newspaper or this journalist has made this up, what action are you taking against them? Your podcast knows about how quickly they've taken action against you guys for offences far less significant than this. What action are they taking? And the answer is none. The answer is fuck all. And I suspect it's because they know, just as we know, who is almost certainly behind that. And actually they were quite comfortable with it, because it undermines the manager in a way that actually, provides a bit of backup to the chief executive and the chief finance officer. And people round the room, I think at that point were like, fucking heck, if we can't get a straight answer on some of this, if we can't get a human conversation over a matter like this, then which hands have we got in the rest of it, you know what I mean?
Aye, you're spot on, and I think, again, it comes back to they're just not holding each other to account at that point. Obviously, a lot's been said in terms of the board and non-executive directors, Paul. Just to sort of bring you back in on that quickly, that was something else that was raised with them. I'm sure, again, people will be caught up with the notes, and people who are interested in that side of things will have their own opinions on it, but they were pushed on, why is the club set up in this way? Why are there people who've been here for X amount of time? Why is there seem to be a reluctance to change and to modernise? Obviously, their response to non-executive directors who have been there for over 15 years was valuable experience, but wisdom, complacency. What's your thoughts there?
So, no, I would say, mate, see, when we're talking about the response to the Sun leak, or we're talking about their kind of dismissiveness around the kind of key questions, or we're talking about the non-executive directors, you know what it all comes back to? It comes back to the fact that it's a boys' club, you know what I mean? And I know that people have no doubt heard that thrown about, but I think last night we seen a perfect encapsulation of it, right? So you'll remember yourself, right? We kind of opened the meeting, and I myself gave a kind of opening spiel about where the club has failed, what's united the fans' anger, and the sort of size of the mandate that the collective has drawn from, all the organisations and supporters groups that have signed that statement. And one thing that the club done, or Michael Nicholson done kind of off the bat, was the language he kept using was, we understand parts of the statement might not have landed. Right, he kept saying that, might not have landed, which even the language in that sort of implies that it's no landed with us because we've not quite understood it, rather than their message being diabolically bad. But one of the things that during the conversation, you might remember this, Andy, we're kind of making the point about how the vast majority of fans, for them at this point, this appears to be a line in the sand. Like, this cannot be more business as usual. And Nicholson interjected at one point and said, look, even though, there's 420 fan organisations, including organisations like the Celtic Supporters Association, like the affiliation, who represent buses with, members probably totaling thousands of people that go home and away, and who are often, less willing to criticise the club publicly. I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying that. These are organisations that voted to have a vote of no confidence in the people that we met with, right? And Nicholson interjected to say that, okay, you might have all of that in terms of all the support who've signed up to this and demonstrated that they don't think we're good enough, but we've heard from some fans that actually the statement did help to clarify things and did help them to better understand what happened in the window. And you know what that tells me? That tells me that Nicholson in particular, but also that wee clique that hangs around the board, that he is insulated himself in an echo chamber of people who are telling him what he wants to hear. That might be kind of friends, it might be board members, it might be just those that he sees at games from his cushy seat, or when he goes into whatever lounge it is he's in before and after matches, and he's hearing from a tiny, tiny cabal of people that actually Michael things are alright. And then when it comes to meet us, and we, collectively as a collective represent such a significant number of the active fan base in the diversity of what we find in the support, he genuinely 100% within the core of his being thinks that we are in the minority, and that we represent, as I say, the kind of rabble-rousers, and that he and his tiny pack around him actually represent what most fans think. And I think that, I totally take Tony's point about it being a step backwards, but for me, the way that it can be a step forward is by sending a clear message to all of us, right? That the only way that we can actually, drive change that will ensure that we get the best out of Celtic is if we sustain this campaign in the long term. These guys aren't going to resign overnight. They're not going to, they clearly think that they're on the correct path. They're stuck in this wee bubble where they're all slapping each other on the back and telling them, listen, one-off games of football against Kai, or a two-legged tie against Kai, these things happen, and they're unable to pull themselves back, or unwilling to pull themselves back to see the bigger picture and see their own failings. And for me, what needs to come for that last night is we need to recognise that actually, see, for the time being, but there's not really going to be any talking sense into these people. We tried that. I honestly thought we might have got a wee bit of that last night, but it wasn't on offer. And the only way that you can break up that kind of boys club whereby it's non-executive directors that have been there for 20 years, when it's people in positions of power like Michael Nicholson who are incapable. I don't know how you can have a chief executive offer of Celtic who is unwilling and incapable of speaking publicly, who hasn't addressed a camera in the 2.5 years that he's been in the job. How you end up with this cabal who are running our club and running it extremely poorly is because they've huddled round and protected each other and dismissed the concerns of everyone else. But there's still more of us than there are of them. We're still going to be about and supporting Celtic long after they're gone. And what the fans need to be doing is taking that longer term view, rather than focusing on, if the team get a couple of wins and we just get back to business as usual, we can't do that this time. And one thing I would say as well is that we've obviously enjoyed loads of domestic success, and we've all absolutely revelled in that and loved that. And it's some of the best days and nights in my life have been following Celtic over the last 10-15 years and what we've been able to do domestically. But see with the resources we have, see with the competitive advantages that we have built in, we should be out of sight. And the problem is that, because we've not taken full advantage of the position that we're in, and now there's a bit of investment over the water, and they're in disarray right now, but see if we allow it, they will eventually, just statistically, if they throw enough money at it, they will get it right. And if we don't want to be pulled back into a situation whereby, it's tit for tat, one title goes to them, and then two to us, and then back and forth, we need to be ensuring that Celtic is fulfilling its potential, because it's not right now, and that can only happen by placing enough pressure on these people for them to realise, actually, see this wee bubble that I'm stuck in, maybe it's not reflective of what other people think, and that's going to take everybody uniting to make sure that they understand that finally.
I think you really make an important point when you talk about the boys' club and the bubbles that Nicholson lives in rather, and it's part of the reason why I brought it up, and I'm going to bring Tony back in here because this is something. It's really top to bottom in the club. We've been banging the drum about nepotism and about fucking bowling club mentality and everything about Celtic for years and years and years, as listeners to the show will be well aware of. Tony, when Paul talks there about how it's always through pals and it's the old pals act and I know a guy for the job and all the rest of it, that isn't just reserved to the boardroom. That isn't just reserved to the people that the club will invite in or Nick's will invite in for a wee pint before the game. Sean Maloney, Darnell Day, Steve McManus, John Kennedy, Neil Lennon, Johnny Hayes, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's not just for my players, it's people's sons, it's people's nephews, it's people's daughters. The list is endless of these people who are given jobs at Celtic, and we're supposed to believe that they're the best, the most experienced person for the job, the best person for the job. However, what do they all have in common? They're all either played for the club or they're related to somebody who's played for the club. Tony, take it away from there. We've banged the drum for long enough, but I know you were wanting to come back in on the sort of nepotism point anyway, but I think it really just speaks to something that we've been shouting about for years.
I think it's embarrassing. I think the best example is Mark Lawwell. Now, I don't know really much about Mark Lawwell. I think he had a job at the City Group and then he became really involved in our recruitment. And in the window he was there, it was a fucking shambles. I mean, I don't think there's anybody left. Maybe Odin Tiago Home, who's coming back to us in December. So that tells me he get that job for one reason and one reason only, and it's not because he's good. I just find all that very tin pot. Like, we kind of go about saying we're a big club, but we act like a wee silly, daft club where it's just, oh, look, my boy's looking for a job. Any chance he could get, aye, fuck, here, look, I used to play for the club. I'm not really up to it. Aye, I'm on in and coach the youth. And the youth, we're not producing much at youth level. Colby Donovan looks good. But in recent years, I mean, I think they're still harping on about, oh, look at Callum and KT and Forrest. KT is nearly 30 and Forrest and McGregor are mid-30s. I mean, they're a kind of example of how bad the youth system is. Like, they're the last examples. That is not an example the board should be using to show how good they are. It's an example of how shite they are and how poor that kind of side of the club is. Like, we produce absolutely nothing, really, if we're honest. There was a couple of things that Paul says that I just wanted to kind of pick up on as well. Like Nicholson saying you don't really represent all the fans. I think the Celtic board are hoping that other fans kibosh the collective. And you probably see it in social media. I think the collective have been very clear. Like, they are not forcing anybody to do anything. It's no saying you're a scab if you don't do this or you're this or that. It's all very respectable. If you want to sing your heart out, go for it. See some of the venom for other fans. Oh, fucking year season ticket up. Dead to fuck. Leave it to the real supporters. Real supporters who never bother turning up during the Ronnie Dyley years, but some of the venom towards the collective is mental. And I think there's still a lot of the fan base that don't know what the collective is. I think there are a lot of fans just think it's a Green Brigade, which is just not the case at all. Like, there's only so many times you can see this is 420 different groups of tens of thousands of people that have signed this. Like, when are people going to start realising that it's not just one group? And even if it was just one group, the concerns are legitimate. The questions they're asking are questions every Celtic fan should be asking. But I think Nicholson and the board will be hoping that other fans kibosh this. That's what I think. I think they'll be hoping for division. And as opposed to Nicholson saying, look, we've got some fans that agree with us, but we know you represent loads of people, let's meet in the middle. He's kind of, it's as if he says, well, It's my gang versus your gang, and we'll see who wins, as opposed to trying to cause unity. They're causing further division. The other point Paul made was about Rangers, and obviously some people are getting a laugh at them now. I kind of struggle to get much of a laugh at them now, if I'm honest. Even when they get beaten in Europe, they've got 8 points out of 2 games. Well, we've got 1. The way I look at it is, this is probably as bad as Rangers will be under the 49ers. Like, it would be pretty impossible to get much worse, and we still could not beat them. So this is them at their very worst under the 49ers, I think. I don't think they're going to go 7 league games with 1 win anytime soon again. I think they get it disastrously wrong with Martin, but that's not going to happen again. Tony Bloom at Hearts, I made this point, we were talking about it. He's not going to make Hearts any worse with the Jamestown analytics mob. They have signed very well and they've started very well. He's a serious guy and he's got proof with Brighton and Union St Gallen. They beat, I think, PSV in the Champions League in Holland. This is a guy that knows what he's doing. So the way I look at it, Rangers won't get any worse for this point once they appoint a new manager, because I don't think anybody's going to be worse than Russell Martin. And Hearts are going to go again in January. But I think there's a lot of our fans that just kind of laugh these things off and go, we're Celtic, we've won 13 at the last 14 titles. The way I look at it is, I don't think the two are going to get worse. I think we've got the potential to get so much worse with these people in charge because they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They can't see the mistakes they're making. And I find that quite terrifying, if I'm totally honest.
And again, I think it's an important point you make, Tony, and it's something that we're really trying to show, that they genuinely believe that they're the right people to take us forward. They genuinely believe that the strategies they've set out are correct. They think there's an issue with communication, i.e. they don't think fans understand transfers, they don't think fans understand the fucking tax laws in Belgium. But again, to bring it back to things that were discussed in the meeting there, Paul, has been briefly mentioned about the disconnect. And again, I genuinely couldn't believe that Nicholson was determined that it was in a minority of fans. Now, don't get me wrong, there's been disagreements about, there's a lot of people around that table and there has been disagreements for the fan side about certain things. But one thing I think the entire room and every single person, every single organisation around that table was in agreement on was the pricing of tickets, the pricing of season tickets, the pricing of Europa League packages. They were raised, and yet again, Paul, I would say we were just given another non-answer, really. It was, they couldn't explain the thought process behind it. They had nothing to say about it. Would you agree with that?
I mean, some of the answers, like, when they did attempt to give us like a wee bit more detail, they were just insulting. You know what I mean? There's no other way to kind of read into some of the responses. So when they were asked about, like, the kind of point was made specifically about kind of for non-season ticket holders, particularly for child tickets, about the cost. I think something was floated around about £45 mark. And what was in, first of all, Mackay kind of jumps in and makes the point of, we're doing that to ensure there's value to the season ticket holders. You're ripping off non-season ticket holders to please season ticket holders. Do you think that's something that they're going to be happy about? Like, absolute madness. He also kept making the point that, we're the cheapest in the UK in the Europa League, largely kind of pivoting us against the prices in England, where it's like commonly understood to be the most extortionate prices in Europe and potentially the world. And we don't exactly get the kind of quality of player, quality of product in any other sense that you find down in England. But like, again, that was part of a pattern for me of, it was either dismissiveness or they were like trying to placate. So in that instance, they not only made those kind of ridiculous points about prices, but one thing that Mackay kept saying was, we'll consider that, until others came in to point out that they had a meeting with the club in the last year discussing other ticket prices, and they were told the exact same thing, 12 months previously, that we'll consider that, but it goes absolutely nowhere. They think that they can pull the wool over our eyes because they think that we're idiots. They think that, we don't have the sort of intelligence and insight that they do. But they come out with some mad stuff throughout. And, the ticket prices was, as you say, it was one of the kind of elements whereby everybody was in agreement. Nobody thinks that ticket prices at 45 quid a pop for a Europa League match is even remotely in the kind of realm of fair and what should be the case for a club of our sort of history and what we are meant to represent. And a point that I made as well was I just don't know how you could justify, when we've got, you know, between 70 and 100 million pound in the bank at any given time, how you could justify raising ticket prices to the extent that they've had on season tickets whilst devaluing it by the amount of games that we actually get for it, when we're just sitting with that money in the bank and it's not doing anything. We're not spending it in the squad, we're not spending it on the stadium or something that we can see tangibly, but we are seeing the salaries of the people that we met last night go up by 15% in Michael Nicholson's case in the last year. And for me, again, it just speaks to like how tone deaf they are, how out of touch they are. And we've seen it in other answers, you know what I mean, when Nicholson was asked about our performances in Europe over the last 10-15 years, which he thought were satisfactory. He didn't think that there was any problem there and thought it performed to an acceptable level, despite the fact that, we've been, Tony's already alluded to, like the 5 qualifiers in a row that we've lost, the fact we've not won a kind of post-group stage tie since 2004. Michael Nicholson and co are actually quite happy with that. Some of the other comments that were made, throughout were, there was points at them was just like stunned, because as I say, like, people couldn't believe that these were positions that these people of serious power within our club actually held. And for me, like, it just points out to we can debate them on some of these different points, around tickets or around accountability, around how they engage, around like the leaks to the Sun, etc. But the truth is that, see, under the current custodians, we're not going to get anywhere on any of these issues, and that the only route at this point is personnel change and long-term structural change, as well as hopefully a kind of democratic fan body that can hold whoever's in the chief executive seat to account, because this dynamic, it really can't continue, or as Tony says, that sort of domestic success that we've enjoyed, and even that will find itself placed under serious risk.
I do. I think you're spot on, to be honest, and I think you speak a lot about this is the outcome when you surround yourself with people who ultimately just pat you in the back. Like, people should be comfortable in there challenging each other, and I just don't see that. I don't at any point believe that they're willing to challenge the status quo. I think they're all quite comfortable, and I think that they genuinely believe that fans won't do that across the board. I think that comes back to the point when they speak about minority, and I think the lack of respect that in the way they gave their answer speaks to that, Paul. I think that they don't believe that they need to answer to anybody other than themselves, and I think that just came across in their answers, and I think it's probably speaks to the importance why we feel the need to come out and really explain that to people, because I don't think any minutes could really do this justice. I wish that I could show people the answers that we were getting on camera, because I think people honestly struggle to believe it at times. Again, I'm hesitant to go through line by line everything that was said, because I think, to be honest, we'll be there for a while saying it's no comment, we'll get back to you, we'll let you know in future. The one thing I will say, in the interest of fairness, is probably the fan survey. Would you agree that was maybe the only thing we could give some update on?
So, I mean, like, what was interesting, so see what you're outlining there, whereby, for me, it is just like classic groupthink, right? Whereby they're just surrounded with like-minded people, nobody's challenging, nobody's questioning the kind of strategy, and this is how we end up with this sort of mental dynamic last night of like ordinary fans who are, like, see when people came out, like, they were shell shocked. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. Like walking at the stadium and seeing people who, like they couldn't believe what they just sat through. That even though I'd imagine, the people in this podcast and a lot of the people in the room probably didn't go into that meeting with like a particularly high opinion of the Celtic board, but even at that, they were still like really taken aback by how bad it was. And I think it was highlighted by some of the discussion around the fan survey. Now, one of the kind of questions that had been raised in the signed statement was around, like, when is the fan survey going to be released, etc. And we had a bit of a discussion about that, and the club explained that it will be released this month. And there was a wee bit of a kind of pushback on what's been the delay. Now, in my kind of working life, like I'm an academic, so I was able to ask a little bit of a question about, what was the process of commissioning this? What did you seek to gather in terms of data? What was the kind of sampling methodology? And why has this, what's been the cause of the delay here in terms of, is it because of an issue on the end of the researchers, or, as I suspect, it was the way it was commissioned by Celtic? I think there was probably a specific issue around the kind of manpower and how much resources and how much time they bought of the academics that were conducting or managing this survey and then reporting back. And what was interesting is, and you'll remember this yourself, Andy, see at the start of the conversation, Mackay, for example, was getting quite defensive and kind of making points about how it was unintelligible, and the job of academics is to take data, quantitative or qualitative, and to report it back in a way that's easy for normal people to read. That's the point of a piece of work like this. So it's no, I don't believe, if I'm honest, that, academics have went and done this work and produced something that normal people couldn't read. That I really don't think that would have happened. But whilst he was getting a wee bit defensive, and Nicholson was too, to a degree, we then seen, I think it was Kevin McQuillan who came in, and he had been in charge from the club side of kind of commissioning that. And he and I had a wee bit of a chat about, how they approached it. And when I was kind of making some of these points around, I felt like they could have been clearer in terms of the sample, the methodology, and then in terms of, I think it sounded to me as though they needed to just buy out more time to kind of get it done. And what was dead refreshing, and this was, one of the kind of younger representatives of the club who's probably certainly worked there less time than the likes of Michael Nicholson. And he actually said, look, I agree with the kind of points that you're making, we maybe bit off more than we could chew to a certain extent, and if I was to do this again, I would definitely take on those points and action the types of things that you're talking about. And one of the boys that was representing the collective from a supporters bus kind of nipped in at that point and said, that was the first time that we've heard any sort of humility and acknowledgement of, where things have gone wrong in 2 hours by that point. On the kind of least important issue, arguably, and with all due respect to McQuillan, because I thought he dealt with things well, one of the kind of least senior and least experienced representatives of the club, who was willing to just put up his hand up and say, look, we tried to do this thing, on reflection, it didn't really work. There were delays because of actions that we've taken, and here's what we would do in the future. And see, when you ask that first question of were you surprised, that's kind of what I expected more of for all the questions, you know what I mean? But see the people that actually have meaningful power in terms of the chief exec and the finance officer, who, by the way, and you'll have seen it last night, Andy, are in essence number one and number two. They in essence manage the club on a day-to-day basis together. See that just putting your hand up and saying, look, aye, we could have done this, we'll try and implement these changes for next time. They were utterly incapable of doing it. And whilst it was good that we get a bit of progress on the fan survey, and I thought McQuillan was one of the few representatives of the club, but potentially the only one, who came out with more credit last night than they went into the meeting with. In some sense, it actually just exposed the rest of them, particularly the kind of main two, because it drew such an obvious comparison as to, somebody who is willing to take accountability and acknowledge, where changes could be made, compared to two who are completely detached from the reality of how badly they've performed, completely detached from the reality of what people think about how they're performing, and who are, still determined to just keep their heads in the sand and pretend that this is all going to blow over. And for me, it was good hearing that from him, but it was also frustrating because if the rest of you could have that perception or have that approach, we might be able to move forward a bit better here, but clearly that wasn't the case.
I think you're right in saying that. And again, just before I sort of come back to Paul with a final couple of questions to wrap things up, Tony, just based off of hearing that, do you think we've found a new CEO?
Maybe, I don't know. No, I don't think Nicholson and Mackay have any plans to go. But the way, for what I've been told, the first thing loads of people seem to say about Nicholson is he's a nice guy. I don't really care. I'm not interested in nice people. I want people that are going to be effective in running Celtic and making Celtic the best they can be. The way I want to word this quite respectfully, because I don't want to come across as kind of crass like I normally do. It sounds as though they two are just kind of following orders from one of our shareholders. That seems to be the case. Is they're doing what they're told, and they're obviously getting paid handsomely. I mean, I think Nicholson's wage is around £800,000 a year. If he's getting taxed 50% on that, you're talking roughly 38 grand a month, maybe a bit more. I don't know. That's a lot of money. And I think a lot of people would say, right, I'll stand in the firing line and get some abuse shouted at me for £38,000 a month. So for what people are saying, it's as if a kind of guy who's not actually a majority shareholder, or maybe is through some other means, is running the show in between playing golf. So they two just seem, to me, I think they are just kind of pawns in the game here. They're just, and they're the only people, they're rightly targeted because they're still taking such an extreme amount of money out of Celtic. Whether they're responsible for this mess or just following orders, they could easily turn around and go, no, I'm resigning because I've got a bit of dignity, but instead they would rather take the money. So I think Desmond's a huge issue as well. I just thought I'd need to get that point in. And I know some people love the idea of this like billionaire at Celtic, but he doesn't actually put any money in. Celtic have all the money in the bank because of us. We keep Celtic afloat, and the fans should remember that. But in terms of waiting 2 hours, for some days, as Paul says, kind of more inexperienced, they turn around and go, you know what, you're right, I actually got that wrong, and I'm going to need to have a kind of look at myself and my processes, and I'm hoping to learn from it. Like, that's very basically, see if any of us fucked up in our work, we would turn around and go, apologise about that, I'm going to need to maybe have a wee look at how I do this again, the next project or the next whatever it is. That's not a lot to ask from a CEO and a CFO, but it sounds as though they've been told, do not give this collective mob a fucking inch, give them nothing. And that seems to be it. That's what that statement was like. It was give them absolutely nothing here, because I don't believe that these guys actually think they've done a good job. They must know that we're getting left behind when it comes to the world of football, when it comes to Brugge and different clubs like this, and Union St Gilles who are in the Champions League and have proper structures. Like, they must know that this whole kind of operation we're running is extremely tin pot compared to that. But it's just as I say, it's very concerning. Like, I thought yesterday was an opportunity for the board to go, yeah, we get that wrong. Yep, that like something as basic as, yeah, we could have got Tanecki signed before the Almaty tie. Like, they might have had to have spent a wee bit extra, but that could have been the difference between us getting in the Champions League and not, and then they would have had even more money in the bank to no do anything with. So, I mean, whether they want to talk about tax law in Belgium, I don't know if they're trying to bore people to death so that they stop paying attention. I mean, that's what a friend of the pod, MB, was saying to me. We seem to be the only club in the world that's affected by all these other factors. Can't get signings done. We're the only club in the world that can't change wage structure for 20 years. We just can't change anything because, well, apparently now it's due to tax in Belgium or these UEFA rules, even though somebody says I think we could have spent 60 million and still been within the kind of constraints. It's just madness. It's total madness. And the bit that I keep thinking about is this was so avoidable. Like, see, like all the Champions League disasters and transfer disasters. See if they'd get this right. See if they'd get into the Champions League and given Rodgers the money to strengthen the team. Like, nobody would be protesting now. Like, this wouldn't be happening. This is self-inflicted by people that don't think they're doing anything wrong. Like, there's fans doing countless different protests and they don't think they've done anything wrong. Like, that is incredible. Like, that is sackable. See if any other company there was protests against them and people really unhappy and the CEO came out and says, we think we're doing well. The board of directors would move to have that person sacked. So it's concerning for me. I think some fans are sleepwalking now and think that Rangers are just shite, Hearts are going to fall away, and I just do not see it like that. I think we're going to get an almighty belt in the mouth soon, and it could be one that's a wee bit harder to recover for.
Aye, I think there's a lot of truth in what you say, Tony. As I say, Paul, if there's anything I've missed for the meeting or anything you think's important to cover, then absolutely you can sort of bring it up now. But the sort of other last point I want to bring up is since that meeting, Celtic have released a statement. Now, I'll open the floor to you there. How do you view that statement in terms of its relation to what went on in that meeting room for 2.5 hours?
I mean, you already kind of alluded to it, that even like when we release minutes or, there's more detailed stuff that comes out for the collective, it's almost impossible to like properly capture how ridiculous it was in the room, how how dismissive they were, how much contempt was kind of dripping for some of their answers. So even our end, it'd be difficult to kind of put that across. But I think the club statement really, again, there's a lot of kind of fluff there that doesn't really tell anything. I don't think that it reflects, as I say, the tone of the meeting. But one element that jumps out is they kind of jump on some action points. And one thing they kind of talk about in particular is they mention, that we agreed to a working fan group on safe standing, and that conversation just didn't happen. And when I say that it didn't happen, I don't mean that we had a discussion and they've maybe misunderstood that there was an agreement when maybe there wasn't. The conversation did not take place. Look, there was no mention of a working fan group around safe standing unless it happened. I've no idea, what they think, but at no point in that, 2 hours and 15 minutes or whatever it was that a discussion point at any stage? I've got no idea where that came from. My only, you're kind of forced into drawing conclusions about why would they include that? Where does that even come from? I've seen some suggestions online that it was maybe mooted at previous fan forums or others or whatever. I've no idea, but it definitely wasn't mentioned last night. And my only sort of, one of the only logical conclusions that I can draw is that what they're possibly attempting to do is to try and give off the impression that this fan campaign is fundamentally about the needs and wants of the Green Brigade and the boys and the sort of ultra element of the support. When, and Tony's already alluded to this, when that is a million miles for the case, this campaign is broadly representative of the diversity that's now found across the support. And Tony makes the point that I think is really worth emphasising about Desmond. The idea that when you're asking some quite basic things of the chief executive, a commitment to come back to us about what they've learned for the transfer window, a commitment to take a fan representative along to the meeting with Police Scotland in regards to the Kettler incident and the Fairhurst inquiry, and he wouldn't commit to any of it. And it really felt to me like Nicholson almost didn't feel like he could commit to anything because he knew that he would have to report back to someone else that holds more power within the club. And I think that was like a real undercurrent to the kind of broader discussion. And it's, Tony's right, like he's paid handsomely to put up with the kind of shit that he gets at games and having to face fans like us, Andy. But for me, having known Nicholson a bit through fan stuff and having seen how he behaved last night, I think the idea that he's telling, Dermot Desmond or even Peter Lawwell, what's to happen in the club and that Michael Nicholson is the true driving force of the strategy and the execution and making the key decisions in terms of the direction of Celtic Football Club. I think if you were to spend, 2 minutes in Michael Nicholson's company, you would quickly realise that that's not remotely possible. That's not what's happening, and that he really is, as Tony said, he's there to face up to the kind of music of the supporters. And for me, it's going to be one thing about removing him, but and whilst that's important because he's not doing the job that he's been paid handsomely to do, what matters more is that we as a support set a precedent that whoever is in that chair is answerable to us, because last night they really didn't feel like they were, and that's a dynamic that we're going to need to change. They treat us like addicts. Tony's right, like if any other company treated you like this, if Tesco treated you like this, you'd shop in Asda, you know what I mean? But you can't in your football club, you love your team too much, you get too much joy if you got to see them and supporting them and watching us win things and whatever. But that statement that went out, I think, was further evidence of the contempt that they hold for us. The fact that they just feel comfortable just lying about an action point that didn't reflect reality is probably fitting, to be honest, of what else went on in the meeting. And I guess it'll just be, we'll try and get stuff out over the course of the next day or so, maybe even before this podcast drops. I don't know how quickly you guys get these things turned around. And then the plan will be to try and hold another, more discussions within the collective and engage with the kind of wider signatories to make sure that the next steps, bring the support a long ways, because Tony's right as well that, fans will have different views on what kind of protest they want to see. For some it's boycotts, but for some they don't want to cost the club money. For others, they don't like the idea of silences. And the truth is that for me what matters here is that there is an escalation and that the board feel the pressure, but you need to take the support along with you. It has to be something that maintains that unity that's been built up. And for me, as much as I understand the odds are really high, because you're up against a structure within the club that protects the largest shareholders, that protects the board because of the shareholding held by one man. But the Celtic support has faced bigger odds before. We've achieved some incredible things, going back to, the success of the Sack the Board campaign in the 90s, right up to, overcoming the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act, like just 7 or 8 years ago. We've faced huge odds before and we've won, but what it's going to take is see, for me, like, for people to get off the sidelines. I've seen lots of commentary online and people are entitled to that, but my thing would be get involved. You know what I mean? Like come to us. If you want to be involved in a subgroup, if you want to actually push this, for me this is a key fight that our support is facing, of this generation. And if we let this opportunity pass by when we do have the unity, we might not have the chance again. So that's the kind of last point I'd want to make. One thing I'd want to actually ask you, Andy, before we finish is, again, see as somebody who, as I say, I've kind of met and dealt with Mackay and Nicholson before and seen their incompetence up close. Were you surprised by, as I say, their sort of lack of charisma, their lack of ability to handle the room, and their inability to answer any questions at all?
Totally. If I take into account, obviously, we've made a lot of comparisons in terms of CEOs running huge companies that are on the other football clubs. But to be honest, even if you look at CEOs who do run other football clubs, and CEOs who speak to fans, and listen, you don't need to look far to see teams that are putting up video footage and speaking to fans and being approachable and being transparent and answering questions and showing a bit of charisma, and it truly astounded at just the total lack of having anything about them that made me think, do you know, he might actually be the right person for this job, but there's something else. None of that came across. To be honest, I've obviously heard a lot of things. I know yourself. I know other people who've been party to meetings with them, and whatever it might be. We all hear things through the grapevine and through people we know and various things like that, and it's just all confirmed for me that it's true. The vast majority, it's true. They've got nothing about them. They shouldn't be in the position that they're in. These guys are paid fucking handsomely to be the face of the football club at a board level. These are the guys who are going into negotiation rooms with managers. These are the guys who are going in, obviously, aside of the manager, to negotiation rooms with agents, with players, with other football teams, with other board of directors. And they've got fucking nothing. They genuinely left us. I mean, I didn't think I could have less confidence in them than I already did, but I was totally fucking scared, is the only way I could describe how I felt sitting in there for 2 minutes, 2 hours and 15, 2.5, whatever it was. Totally scunnered. And it just compounded everything for me. It just confirmed everything I'd been told, everything I thought. And it really did just, I mean, as if I needed any confirmation. As Tony mentioned, like, we're not in there because we want to be. I'm not in there because I want Michael Nicholson's staff to be asking me if I want a cup of tea. I'm in there because the club matters. The club matters to me. Me, you, people listening to this, everybody. It affects us every day. It's what we spend our money on. It's what we spend our time on. It's what we fucking go into work and talk about all day. It affects our mood. It affects our light. It affects everything, and it matters so much to us. And they couldn't give a fuck. And they're just not. They shouldn't be in the room. They shouldn't be the people in these positions. And as I say, Paul, that's my takeaway from it, is that they need to be removed. As I say, there's more changes that need to go on at the club, but if you're asking me about those two, they're paid handsomely. They're not doing their job. It's as simple as that. If I don't do my job, questions get asked of me. If I continue not to do my job, I've not got a job. It's as simple as that. And everybody else listening to this, it'll be in the exact same boat. I think we've probably rambled on for long enough now. I think, or I hope rather, we've really sort of painted the picture to people about just a lack of accountability. I'm coming back to that word again. The disregard for supporters, the need for change across the club, the real need for change. And I think, Paul, I couldn't really summarise a lot of that better than yourself. So I'll no try in terms of this is over to the fans now. This is over to people who were maybe a bit in the fence. And listen, I get it, it's no easy standing outside the ground for 10 minutes. It's no easy saying, oh, do you know what, there's a new Adidas fucking launch shoot, that's really nice, I want to buy that. It's no easy, whatever it might be, and I understand that, but there's just there's bigger issues. We need to think about long term. We need to think about 5 years' time, about 10 years' time, about 15 years' time. And the reality is that this is as united as I've ever seen the fans across the board. But we can go further. People can go further. And as I say, I guess the hope for this was to really give people an insight. Listen, I wish we could have got 60,000, fucking 100,000, a million people sitting there watching that, because I believe they'd boot them all if we could have done that. But the best thing we could do was, as we say, put across minutes, put across your view from the collective and speak about it yourself, myself, and get that out there. So I hope that it's gave some people an idea, just the total disregard that they've got for fans and how much they really couldn't give a fuck, and they don't actually think that they need to answer to anybody other than a major shareholder in Dublin who's probably thinking about what time he's going to tee off tomorrow. But nothing else today, Paul, than just thank you for coming on. I would say I hope to have you on again soon, but generally we're no discussing good moments at Celtic with any time you've been on in the past. But so hopefully that's something that can change soon.
We said that last time, mate, when I was on moaning about Bernard Higgins. And I seem to be the bearer of bad news on here, so hopefully next time it's cheerier. Hopefully next time it's talking about some of the kind of victories or some of the progress of the campaign, because that can be a positive thing. You know what I mean? That is something that hopefully leads to some form of progress within the club and for the fans. But for the time being, I can't believe it's only Tuesday as we sit here recording, because it's been a long week after that day and meeting last night. But we'll keep people posted as far as we can with the campaign, and hopefully you and I will get a bit of a break for some stuff over the international weekend, because it's been hard work for the collective the last few weeks.
Aye, you're spot on. So again, listen, Tony, Paul, thanks a lot for coming on, and we'll be back again soon. We hopefully either some good news or we can get back to talking about the football as soon as possible. But thanks again. Cheers.